Welcome to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're going to be talking about stormwater management. I have a couple of people with me who have thought a whole lot about water issues. I have Lance LeComb with Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District. Do I have that right?
Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District, MSD.
MSD, okay, great. And I have Lorin Crandall with the Missouri Coalition for the Environment. Welcome back, Lorin. It's been quite a while.
It has been, but I'm glad to be back.
Okay, now tell me, I think a lot of people don't even know what you mean by stormwater management. I mean, when it storms, there's water. Well, it just all goes away and it disappears, and then there's not a problem. So are there issues that come up with, I mean, what does stormwater management mean?
Well, certainly for MSD, we're two utilities under one umbrella.
Okay.
We're a wastewater utility that takes used water, sewage from homes and businesses. We transport it to one of 7 treatment plants. And then we have stormwater where it doesn't impact our wastewater system. And that stormwater where it doesn't impact our wastewater system is our separate stormwater utility that deals with the maintenance of the stormwater infrastructure, enforcement of rules and regulations.
Okay, what do you mean by stormwater infrastructure?
Storm sewers, the inlets, the sewers that take water off our streets and directly to creeks and streams.
Okay, and so basically we want those to be functioning. We want the water to flow where it's supposed to flow.
Yes.
And we don't want the pipes to crack and have to pay $50,000 to repair them.
Right, we want to maintain it properly, but also as part of development or redevelopment, developers are required to come to MSD for plan review and approval, and we do have stormwater requirements around development in the city and the county.
Okay.
I think an important thing to talk about with stormwater is how in a natural watershed that's forested or has prairies or grassland, you don't need stormwater infrastructure. The natural system manages all the rainfall and puts it to good use. In a system where you've built roads and houses and you have a lot of mown lawn and parking lots and sidewalks, you have all this rainfall and it has no prairie or forest or soil really for it to absorb into, and so it runs off and you have to send it somewhere or else you get a lot of flooding throughout the community, and so that necessitates stormwater infrastructure. That said, a lot of times we think about getting the water off of the land, and that's priority A #1 for developers and homeowners and businesses, but we also have to think about where we send it. And a lot of the creeks and streams around St. Louis City and St. Louis County have been heavily degraded because of the dramatic increase in stormwater that's been diverted into them that used to be absorbed by trees or by grasses, native plants and healthy soils. And so as you get more impervious surfaces, you can tend to throw a watershed out of balance and cause a lot more issues with especially erosion and flash flooding. Also, though, the quality of stormwater isn't very good. The quality of water that infiltrates into the forests and replenishes the groundwater table comes out of a spring, that's really high quality water. The water that washes off a parking lot with shavings from brake pads, motor oil, transmission fluid.
You don't want to drink that.
You don't want to drink that, and it's hot. In the summer, it's really hot, so it can't hold very much dissolved oxygen chemically. That water isn't high quality water. In the winter, it's got a lot of salt in it from road salt. That water tends to poison the ecosystem, and it's problematic. And so, I think one of the reasons we're really here today is to talk about what we need to do to change the way the stormwater dynamic works in our watersheds. And I know MSD is doing a lot of work on that, and in my work we've been looking at that as well.
Okay, so it seems to me that there's 2 really big issues that you mentioned in terms of stormwater management. One is if you pave everything over, or pave, I don't know what percentage of an urban area is pavement, but of course for that we have to add housing and any sort of building. And so the one issue is that there's just a lot less water that actually soaks into the ground because of human activity. And the second issue is that there's a whole lot of things that go into the water that wash off. I assume that water washing off of shingles and getting a little bit of asphalt shingle residue is not particularly healthy water to drink. But there's another issue that I've heard you mention before, that is the land in the city that people have walked on for 100 years, does that soak up water as easily as land in a forest?
You know, recently I did a project with an artist named Mary Miss at the Pulitzer Foundation, and I sent in a request to Lance. I was like, hey, I need some data on St. Louis City. Can you send me the stormwater infrastructure and the impervious surface information? And he did, and lo and behold, when I opened up the St. Louis City stormwater, it's a fabric that underlays virtually every city block. There's very little non-stormwater infrastructure covered area within the city. So, you know, whether or not people have walked there and the soil is compacted, I don't know. But when you look at the city, it is primarily covered in impervious surface and underlain with storm
impervious, it just means
sewers.
it doesn't soak up water.
Yeah.
And so that's the majority of the city.
Of the city proper,
Okay,
I would say. I mean, I don't know what the actual percentage is, but it's a dominant.
Quite high.
Yeah.
It's quite high. I mean, St. Louis does have you know, wonderful parks, and obviously Forest Park
Right.
is a large area, but the impervious area is a majority of the city. And when you're looking at, to build on what Lorin was talking about, to your point about historically, you know, since St. Louis was first founded 250 years ago, we have blacktopped over, cemented over, developed over. And where we find ourselves today in better understanding watersheds and water management, we need to do our best to unwind some of that, to return to a natural state, reopen green spaces for stormwater management. What we do find is when we do build rain gardens or other water features and manage stormwater, you do need to go in and replace the soils if you're going to have good performance from that feature for the management of stormwater. So there is a lot that needs to be done because of the compacted soils, but also because of the type of soils we have here in St. Louis.
Okay, you said you need to replace the soil. Okay, I'm having a hard time understanding what that means. What would it mean to replace soil?
Well, if you want to have, let's say, for example, a rain garden.
Okay,
which
what is a rain garden?
A rain garden is a natural feature with ideally natural plantings indigenous to the area. And you want that to soak up the rainwater, hold back the rainwater from our sewer system. That's what we look for as part of Project Clear, which we'll learn more about shortly. But what we find is that you need soils that can handle that water, that can hold back that water to keep it off our sewer system. And not all the soils in St. Louis lend themselves to that, and it's also because you do have compaction and other things that have taken place over hundreds of years.
So what would you do, bring in other soil? Or
we do. We have been looking at how do certain soils perform. If we go to a wider green program, a rainscaping program as we call it, do we need to replace soil? So we're doing all of that as part of a pilot program that we're in the middle of right now to better understand how green features or rainscaping will perform here in the St. Louis area.
Okay, this is the thing that I started to think about when you described that. If you say replacing soil because it's not pervious and it doesn't soak in rainwater as well, well then don't you have to take that soil, which isn't as good soil, and dump it someplace else in order to get soil which is good to bring in? Well, and if you switch good soil for bad soil, doesn't that just mean that you're putting impervious soil someplace else?
Let me get into that
I think
a little
Lorin's
bit.
going to take that there. I don't want to step on him there.
I used to work in landscape architecture for a few years before I did this, and so I designed a lot of features. And sometimes you have to get rid of the soil, especially if it's contaminated. It can be highly compacted, but a lot of times what you end up doing is amending it. And so you might add in some things to give it better properties. You'll still end up with a volume of soil that you need to go somewhere with, but that's the nature of making a rain garden anyways, because instead of a mound, like a typical flower bed that you see around, a rain garden's the opposite. It's an indentation, and it's designed to allow water to collect there. So you've still got to work with the soil, but in typical rain garden designs, unless you're on a perfectly flat slope, you typically have an area where you can berm the soil up around the edge and allow more pooling and more storage in that zone. So that's usually where you go with that extra soil, unless it's heavily contaminated. And even if it is heavily contaminated, I mean, it depends on what it's contaminated with, because actually the rain garden itself and the plants and the infiltration can be one of the best ways to deal with some of the typical pollutants that we see.
But back to my question.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, if you have soil which is contaminated by lead, and you dig it up and you take it someplace else, the lead doesn't go away. You still have lead in the soil. So moving contaminated soil around doesn't reduce contamination. It just takes the contamination from here and puts it there.
And that, that really gets into a whole nother can of worms with the brownfield program and lead remediation. That's a good example.
But that's just one example. I mean,
Sure.
St. Louis has an abundance of toxins that contaminate.
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
in just a minute, we're going to see a movie about Project Clear. Lance, could you tell us a little bit about what's behind that movie and what it's trying to
Sure.
point to us?
I was speaking earlier about how we're two utilities under one umbrella, a stormwater utility and a wastewater utility. And Project Clear deals with how stormwater impacts our wastewater system. And Project Clear is a reflection of an agreement we reached with the Environmental Protection Agency and the Coalition for the Environment. $4.7 billion in spending over 23 years, a great opportunity for our community.
Okay, great. Okay, let's take a look at the short movie introducing MSD Project Clear.
Water seems so harmless, even refreshing, in our daily life. Sewer systems were built to handle water we don't want, both wastewater and stormwater. And our systems need to be improved. Sewers. You don't see them, or probably think about them, yet they were originally built to protect public health and help prevent deadly diseases, like cholera. Never heard of it, right? We owe that to our sewer system. St. Louis was founded in 1764, and since then has grown to a city and county population close to 1.3 million. And its sewer system has grown with it all by extending this old system piece by piece, year after year. Now we have a system close to the size of LA, but serving just a fraction of its population. But this system needs improvement because at times there's more water than it can handle. That's why Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District, MSD, in an agreement with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, has launched Project Clear. Project Clear has three major objectives: get the excess rain out of the system during heavy storms, repair and maintain what we have, and build new system improvements. Through Project Clear, MSD is proud to make a multi-billion-dollar investment into our community over a generation. Because, like all utilities, the best sewer systems aren't seen, they just work.
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. We just got to see a movie introducing MSD's Project Clear. I have with me a couple of people who know a lot more than I do about stormwater management. I have Lorin Crandall with the Missouri Coalition for the Environment, and I have Lance LeComb with the Metropolitan Sewer District. Tell me, Lorin, was there anything about that brief movie about Project Clear that stands out in your mind that you think the viewer should be aware of?
Well, I think it's great that as a part of the settlement, we're going to be working directly on these stormwater issues. In my role, I see all the time the direct impacts of this with erosion and flooding and water quality issues. And so I think it's a valuable investment. I think that overall, the entire consent decree settlement is going to drive a lot of good jobs in the community for the next 2 decades. And I think that it's great that we're investing in our infrastructure and looking for ways to build relationships with stakeholders in the watersheds to get them the tools, resources, and knowledge that they need to do the things that will help us preserve our watersheds.
And by infrastructure, you mean like the pipes and everything that manages the water, that diverts it from one place to another?
Well, and that gets a little beyond Project Clear to deal with some of the other issues
that's part of it. Okay.
Yes,
and
yes.
so this would have to be redone sooner or later anyway, because once you build a water management system, it's not going to last for eternity.
Yeah, I think though the important thing to think about is that we're actually getting away from pipes. That's kind of the old way, and now we're starting to look at ways to stop relying on the pipes.
That is the way that I think
much.
about it, is pipes.
Yeah.
Okay.
A great example is in the Bissell Point watershed, directly adjacent to the Mississippi River. We're investing $100 million in rainscaping in lieu of a tunnel, which would have cost well over $1 billion. And when you build a tunnel, and our tunnels are deep underground, 200-300 feet underground, they're storage tunnels for stormwater. If we're doing $100 million of work at the surface, though, there are hopefully other benefits that can be realized by the community in terms of a built environment or other externalities. So while we're in there spending $100 million on rainscaping, or green infrastructure as some call it, it does provide an opportunity or a catalyst for other types of development.
And so part of that would help the water soak into the ground as opposed to just move it eventually to go into the Mississippi River.
Manage it where it falls is the idea.
And of course that's going to help the soil. over the long run, because if the soil is just dried out by having a century of water taken off of it and put into the river, that's going to make the river have more erosion, plus it's going to decrease the quality of the soil.
Well, in our case, it's less water going into the sewer system. It's holding back water from the sewer system. And our big challenge and what we're addressing through Project Clear is the occurrence of sewer overflows, during which heavy rainstorms, we have so much water getting into the sewer system. We have overflows of sewage and rainwater going directly into streams.
I can see that where I live.
Yeah, and basement backups as well. And so that's what we're focused on.
Okay, well, let's switch a little bit and talk about trees and native plants. What does stormwater management have to do with healthy vegetation?
Well, vegetation is the skin of the watershed. It really protects it and absorbs the rainfall. And without it, the watersheds become degraded. And so when we look around, we can't just tear down the whole city, we can't rip up every road, but there's a lot of places where the land's nominally used, but for some reason it's a mown lawn along the highway, or there's plenty of places that you can look around and say, man, if we just put some more vegetation out there, some nice trees, some nice native plants, it would do a lot for the stormwater. It would also do a lot for the ecosystem. It would also sequester carbon. It wouldn't require gas to mow. It wouldn't require nutrients to fertilize. All of these things are beneficial to the environment, beneficial to the ecosystem, and beneficial to water quality specifically. There's also energy savings from having more shade from the trees, and it reduces heat island effect.
Right.
There's just so many benefits, and the best part of it is that trees are nearly free. There are a lot of great ways that you can get trees cheap or free. If you're in a stream team, you can get trees from the Department of Conservation. So that's the Missouri Stream Team's a great volunteer water quality monitoring and trash pickup and reforestation program. So there's a lot of resources available to do that, and so that's something that I promote because it doesn't really cost anything, and if it does, it's not much. And everybody likes planting trees. I've hosted a lot of restoration events, and people love planting trees. It's a really great thing to do.
Well, it sounds to me like the issue of stormwater management really intersects with climate change a whole lot, because the heat island effect is where the city is hotter than the surrounding countryside, largely because of all the cement and all of the impervious surfaces. So the more that you have trees and the more vegetation you have, the less of a heat island effect that you have. And if we're going to survive climate change, we need to avoid that heat island
and
effect.
Particularly in an older urban area like St. Louis, where you have these older buildings that are very thick, made of brick. They hold that heat throughout the day and night. And so very important points.
Yeah, okay. So what about the whole issue of riparian buffers? First of all, what is a riparian buffer?
Well, a riparian buffer is the area along the stream banks, and it kind of depends on how you want to delineate it. There's a lot of places that'll recommend a rule of thumb of 50 or 100 feet. It varies, but I think the key is that if there is an opportunity to establish better vegetation along a stream within 100 feet or within the floodplain or around an erosion spot, then we should do that. And that riparian buffer can filter out up to 70 or 80% of the nutrient runoff. It can help with a lot of the non-point source pollution. It can help hold the soil together when the stream floods. And it, looks good.
Okay, what
provides good habitat.
What are you talking about for the nutrient that absorbs a lot of the nutrients? What do you mean by that?
Well, nutrients are a plague in America. We have an excess of nutrients that are causing a dead zone that is persistent and massive in the Gulf of Mexico. And so that's a big focus of my work, looking at nutrient loading, and that means nitrogen and phosphorus. And the phosphorus typically comes from erosion and from some synthetic fertilizers, and then the nitrogen is primarily from agricultural runoff, but in urban areas there's a lot of nutrient runoff where people are using lawn fertilizers. Also animal waste, wildlife waste can contain a lot of nutrients, and when a combined sewer overflows, that has a lot of nutrients in it, and basically that fosters algae growth, and that algae growth is what creates hypoxic conditions. When it dies and it's digested, it sucks all the dissolved oxygen out of the water, making it impossible for creatures to live in that water without dissolved oxygen.
And so that has something to do with the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico.
It's the cause,
And Lorin brings up great points. The old saying, think globally, act locally. We as individuals in a community, there is much we can do to help those issues. Number one, pick up after your pet if you walk your dog. We see that all the time in urban areas, and one of the major pollutants in local and urbanized streams is pet waste and natural wildlife.
So a little bit is not going to hurt the stream, but when you have a huge amount from millions of people with
the tens of thousands of cats and dogs we have in our area, and think of how many of them defecate outdoors. When it rains, that goes into a local stream or creek. It's a big impact on the waterway. We as individuals as well, there's this myth around the American lawn, I want to have a perfect green manicured lawn. That takes a lot of inputs, fertilizer, pesticide, even mowing the lawn with a gas-powered mower. That all has an environmental impact as well. There are different ways of doing things.
Doesn't Roundup break down into nothing within 24 hours?
Well, it's the judicious use of inputs, if you would, the chemicals in a fertilizer. I think a great example.
I say that sarcastically because Roundup is sold with the claim that it breaks down into nothing, but in fact it breaks down into chemicals that can be as toxic as the original Roundup were.
And Lorin brought up another great point earlier about salt. I think municipalities during the winter are getting more, they're very responsible about how they use salt, not just from an environmental perspective, but it's a cost to them, so they're holding their costs down to use salt and brine and other alternatives. But particularly this past winter, as we've seen in St. Louis, we had some heavy storms, and people just blanketed their sidewalks with salt and de-icer.
So every time you do that, there's consequences.
Right, you don't need that much, just a little bit less will go a long way.
None of us want to fall down and have a broken bone, especially an elderly relative coming over and breaking a bone.
But you don't need a completely covered sidewalk and salt.
So the least salt that we can use, and if we can come up with non-salt solutions like sand or something like that, that might be a better alternative than using large amounts of salt.
There were two things that just came up, and they're things that I've looked at a lot in our work on the Kiefer Creek watershed, the creek that flows through Castlewood State Park. And on the salt issue, we recommend more shoveling. Pay the kid down the street to shovel your sidewalk.
Make a jobs program.
Right. It's a great. During the snowpocalypse, I was thinking, goodness, aren't there all these people who would love to make a buck right now who are on hard times?
When I was a kid,
hold that thought, because we're going to take a short break and be right back for a wrap-up. Welcome back to our wrap-up of Green Time. Lorin, I was when you were talking about using less salt, a lot less salt, the image that went through my mind was a couple of winters ago when it was really, really cold, and we have a low spot in our sidewalk in front of our house, and so the snow melted, it formed ice, and then it melted, formed water, and then it refroze, so there's a sheet of ice in front of our house. So I would say that this is probably one of the times that salt is justified. Would you agree? Okay, so we're not saying no salt at all, you're saying a lot more judicious use.
A lot more judicious use. Try to get as much of the snow and ice off with a shovel as you can, or like I said, get the kid down the street to do it. The other thing is you can use a mixture of salt and birdseed to achieve better traction and also provide some food for wildlife in the winter. So
I never thought of salt and birdseed. That's great.
It's a very ecological way to do it. You can make your own brine solution at home and use a sprayer to spray it.
I want to give Lance. Do you have we have less than a minute. What's the major point that you'd like to leave the viewer with?
Sure. Project Clear at projectclearstl.org is, as I mentioned earlier, an agreement we have with EPA and the coalition. It's a generational investment. Investing in an infrastructure system that goes back to the 19th century. It's a very exciting time. Visit the website, learn more about it. It's going to touch all of us in some way, shape, or form with great benefit for our community.
Fantastic. Okay, I want to thank Lorin Crandall from the Missouri Coalition for the Environment. I want to thank Lance LeComb from the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District for all of the incredible information that you've shared with us. I want to thank our viewers for tuning in, and I hope that people were able to absorb a lot of the information, and be sure to tune in Green Time the same time next week.